We've been seeing these conflicts brewing for quite some time, and it could have been a big showdown this episode. But surprisingly, we got a rather happy ending. With tears in his eyes, Igor screams out Ivar's name for the last time as they go their separate ways. We lose sight of Gunnhild beneath the waves as she finally reunites with her beloved husband in the halls of Valhalla. Meanwhile, in Iceland, Flatnose massacres half the settlement over a big dead fish. Now, my feelings of the Rue storyline this episode are quite mixed. Like, on one hand, I didn't hate what they did with the switcheroo, where we thought it was going to be a trap, we were expecting a battle, we were waiting to see what Oleg was going to do, just to find out all the suspense and waiting was for nothing, and the people had already turned on Oleg and welcomed Igor back with open arms. Right from the beginning of the episode, they were really hyping up this battle, putting on the music and the drums and the march. We got this cool shot of the warriors walking into the mist, Prince Dur slowly approaching the gate, looking around, all these eerie shots with the wind blowing and the horses neighing in the background. And they even keep the tension going all the way up to the point where the soldier comes out with the sword. They knew what they were doing, they were toying with our emotions the whole way, just to kind of give us a nothing fest. Even without the battle or the showdown, they did try to give us some kind of cathartic ending to Oleg. We get to see him pace around in the empty halls of Kiev, kind of going stir-crazy, mumbling to himself these different phrases and delusional thoughts, whilst in the background we can hear all the joy and laughter from the celebration outside. It kind of reinforces the fact that everyone's abandoned him and turned on him, and he really stands on his own. So when he comes out onto that balcony, basically crying and making his plea about how they should all come together and just talk, no one really buys it and no one really supports him. Funnily enough, the atmosphere is almost awkward as everyone kind of realizes he's finished. So even as he continues to make his pleas, Ivar gives the bow to Igor. And on the very balcony that Oleg prophesized Igor would strike down Prince Dur is where Igor kills him instead. Oleg was only introduced to us as a character in Season 6. And in that small amount of time, he's become my favorite villain of all time on this show. The actor is so good at portraying him, he brings so much energy and light into every scene, and has kind of single-handedly risen the Rue storyline in my mind to be one of my favorites. And because of that, I really wished he had a more spectacular and grand ending. Like, there was some poetic justice to how this ended, and it was a little bit cathartic, but for the most part, it really didn't feel that satisfying. Like, we were happy because Ivar and Viksik and Igor won, and that was cool, but it wasn't one of those epic moments that I'm going to remember, like Björn's death. It almost felt like the Rue storyline needed a couple more scenes and moments in between where we left last episode and where we picked up here. Like, we saw Prince Dur make the exchange with some of the lords buying their loyalty and making sure the army would stand down, but it was kind of rushed through and we only going to saw it in a few shots. Like, somehow we went from the scene where all the counselors were raising their hands in the air, shouting Igor's name, and really behind Oleg's messaging. And the next, he's on his own without any allies, mumbling things to himself. So I could have done with a few more connecting scenes between those moments. So we find out there really isn't much mystery behind Katya at all. She's just a Rus noblewoman who married Oleg, chose to betray him, loves Ivar, and the whole time it was really just him projecting the image of his former wife onto her and not some bigger mystery or plot twist. Which kind of makes their whole relationship a bit more awkward when things calm down, which makes sense because you don't really want to live in the ghost of a woman you can never really compete with, and so she kind of sends him away. I did also really enjoy those closing moments we got between Igor and Ivar before they parted ways. It's so sweet to see this kind of childlike innocence in Igor as he realizes he may never see this friend ever again. Ivar always likes to have this veneer around him as this very serious and formidable Viking. Because of his disability, people always underestimated him and looked down on him, and so he had to compensate for that. But with all this time that Igor has spent with Ivar, he's managed to kind of drop his defenses and really make him vulnerable. And right as they're leaving at the end, we even see Viksid notice this. Much to the fortune of battle junkies like myself, Iceland was able to compensate for all the action we missed out on in the Rus storyline. So just in case the few people in Greenland didn't know already, Flatnose puts up an almost comedic fence around his property to kind of demonstrate that the whale is supposedly his. And at first, Ubbe kind of looks on and almost sheer disbelief, like, are they really doing this? But over the course of this conversation with Athelstan, he starts to realize the consequences for this action are very severe, and people may even starve to death. Now, even though Athelstan's points were technically correct, the way he was kind of spinning them and adding on extra information about Floki and saying be prepared was a little bit manipulative and a bit ominous. And we do see in the boat later on, Ubbe is starting to get more uncomfortable with this web of lies that Athelstan's spinning, and the way he always frames things in certain ways that aren't wrong but misleading. So unlike the Roose storyline where they tease us a lot, stretch out the information and fill it with tension, they kind of just jump straight to the punchline. The very next scene, the whole crowd kind of shows up, really angry, like, whoa, we're gonna need that fish, bro. We need the fuel for our fires, we need the food to stay alive. And next minute, they all start throwing axes at each other. Even though they added a bunch of shaky cam into the fight, it was kind of intense and all over the place, it was still pretty easy to follow the main beats from who was dying, who was fighting, who was in peril. We see Ubbe go down, but then get saved by Oh Dear. And it was even pretty cool to see Torvi in the background, one arm around the baby, the other one just taking people down with an axe. They definitely want to show us that no one really won this fight. Even though Flatnose technically chases them away and gets to keep the whale and maybe even become king of Greenland, there's only really like 3 dudes left anyway. And so we pan out with this crazed man sitting atop this whale that he's fought so hard for, his son dead, his wife crying, and a stack of bodies surrounding him. And a certain quote from a bearded Scandinavian man comes to mind. Power is only given to those who are prepared to lower themselves to pick it up. So forced to flee in a hurry, they find themselves way out at sea with no place to go, no food, and no water. And just when things were looking very bad, a storm rolls in. Only a few episodes ago, a storm was a great challenge on their journey that not only claimed the life of Torvi's child, but could have killed them all. And now it's their savior that brings them the water they need to live. It's kind of an interesting message around how these things that happen in nature aren't inherently good or bad. It's the context of when they happen and how they happen that really matter. Like for all intents and purposes, that whale should have been a godsend for that community. They can use the blubber to feed their fires and cook their meals and keep them warm. They can eat the meat itself to stave off hunger, and maybe even use the bones for tools. But in the end, it ruined their community and killed most of them. So it may have been a rough start to their journey, but Ubbe is back out at sea, and now, hopefully, he can aim for the true Golden Land. So we had a pretty good idea that this storyline was heading in this direction from last episode. But saying that, most of what happened in Kattegat felt like pointless drama. The whole Skarni thing didn't really have much point. Ingrid confronting Eric about the slavery thing seemed unnecessary and overly convoluted. And even though Gunnhild's death was beautifully shot, the emotion was there, and it was a rather graceful closure to her storyline, it was the definition of pointless. All of that political intrigue we've followed over the last few episodes kind of fell flat. The election didn't really mean much, and the whole dynamic between Eric and the others kind of became redundant. The Kattegat storyline could never really match up to that of like the Roose or even Iceland because the chemistry was just a lot weaker. We never really fully committed to these characters or cared about them. They didn't have time to develop, and even when we did develop them, it was like, eh. Like I still really like Harald and he can carry scenes by himself, but a lot of the other people around him are hard to bounce off. So overall, I'll say this episode was a bit weaker than most we've got this season. The Iceland part was pretty fun and exciting, and we're getting some good movement there. There were still some really amazing moments in the Roose storyline. I almost teared up in some of those scenes. But I do wish we could have got a lot more from a lot of these different storylines and scenes, especially in Kattegat. But I would love to hear what you guys thought about this episode in the comment section below, and if you liked the video, smash that thumbs up. On to episode 16.